This video will focus on the Virgin Mary painting in the new room of George Washington's Mount Vernon, a believed companion piece to the St. John the Evangelist painting, which has been covered on this channel in its own video. This pastel portrait of the Virgin Mary, painted between 1700 and 1750, originally hung in the new room at Mount Vernon, together with its pastel of St. John the Evangelist. It is not known when the Washingtons acquired this set of pastels. The style of pastel suggests it was inspired by the work of Italian artist Rosalba Carrera. Rosalba Carrera lived between 1673 and 1757. She was an Italian Rococo painter. In her younger years, she specialized in portrait miniatures. She was known for her pastel portraits and helped popularize that medium in 18th century Europe. She is remembered as one of the most successful woman artists of any era. Virgin Mary pastels known to be by Carrera reveal the same downcast look, and this purchase of a female artist by Washington is notable. In November 2003, when a group of descendants of John Augustine Washington III visited Mount Vernon, one family member brought with her a photo of a work of art in her possession. It was a beautiful pastel of the Virgin Mary, a painting that the Washingtons hung in the mansion's large dining room or new room. More than 200 years after the Washingtons' deaths, and a voyage through several generations of the distinguished Washington family, the Virgin Mary returned home to Mount Vernon just before Christmas 2003, through the extraordinary generosity of Maud T. Drain, a great-great-granddaughter of Washington III, the last private owner of Mount Vernon. You can learn more about the last owner of Mount Vernon on this channel. The discovery of the painting was so notable, the 2008 White House made it one of its official Christmas ornaments. X-raying or scanning the portrait may reveal more about its origins, but since Mount Vernon scraped mentions of the Confederacy from the Washington family burial ground, faith in their preservation efforts is questionable. So why this portrait? Firstly, Washington's mother was named Mary, and so the name held special significance for him. Mary Ball Washington was born in 1707 or 1709 in Lancaster County, Virginia. She's described by her son's early biographers as pious, self-sacrificing, a widow raising 5 children under difficult circumstances. But modern biographers describe her as selfish, cold, and determined to thwart her son's ambitions in the ongoing revision of American history by the mainstream. Neither view totally captures the strong, complex, and anxious woman revealed in the records, a woman haunted by childhood deprivation and loss, but the first comes much closer than the second, according to Mount Vernon magazine and author Martha Saxton. Later scholars use fragmentary evidence of Washington's annoyance with his mother over her requests for small amounts of money, and her unhappiness with his inclination to military life, to condemn her as an overprotective, ignorant shrew. But she was neither illiterate nor greedy. She was a fervent reader of prayer books, frugal to a fault, and on one occasion so cash poor she was unable to feed herself. Orphaned early at the age of 12 and an only child, fears of illness, death, and want pursued her through her long life as she relentlessly pursued stability for herself and her family. Mary Johnson Ball, Mary's mother, left her orphan daughter a horse, her riding habit, and the promise of a slave. The sad girl made her new home with her half-sister Elizabeth, who recently married, and she became an expert horsewoman. Mary's losses made her transition into adolescence, when girls typically began thinking about marriage, particularly confusing as she became her sister's second hand. Within months of their mother's death, Mary and Elizabeth witnessed an overseer come with a cart to take away barrels of their tobacco, corn, barley, and wheat, his reward for a successful suit against their deceased mother for back pay when she could not defend herself. Nothing in life was certain. Mary Washington brought the same tenacity to protecting her children's health and enhancing the opportunities available to them. Even now, if you tour Washington's boyhood home in Fredericksburg, Virginia, Ferry Farm, you may find some of the hair rollers Mary was known to make as one of her many small business enterprises. That is, if the city of Fredericksburg hasn't snapped them up and burnt them, just as they destroyed the slave auction block that once stood in the town square a few years ago. Her oldest son, George Washington, born in 1732 when Mary was around 25 years old, shared a number of traits. Some were biological, like both were tall and physically robust. Some were a mixture of biology and practice. Both carried themselves quietly and commandingly, and both were superb horse riders. But the most stark similarity was their approaches to daily life. Both were extremely careful with money and frugal. Even in his high spending years, Washington accounted for every penny. Even while at war, he thought about the cost of gardening equipment back at Mount Vernon. Both cared vigilantly for their property. Both labored to control hot tempers. Both owned slaves, both were devout readers, and Mary remained staunch in her belief that slave labor was needed to till great acres of lands. However, the act of slavery in the Washington family never meant cruelty or unkindness. George Washington built homes for his slaves, as well as provided them with meals and even hunting guns. When Mary Washington had the ability to leave her slaves in Fredericksburg, she refused to do so. Having taken a decision, mother and son did not waver. Washington's endurance at Valley Forge, having multiple horses shot from under him, and his tireless pursuit of support from the vacillating Continental Congress attest to his unique ability to persist in the face of frustrations. And despite her straitened circumstances, legal attacks, and the hurdles Mary jumped through as a woman trying to manage on her own, she educated and raised 5 young children and gave them advantageous social opportunities, even after her husband died in 1743. Each of her children married up socially, George higher than any of the others, into the wealthy Custis family, and together mother and son published a book in 1732. Decades earlier, Augustine Washington, Washington's father, sailed to England on business and to visit his sons who had been sent to school there. But on his return, he discovered his first wife, Jane Butler Washington, died. George Eskridge, Mary's guardian, supposedly arranged an introduction between his friend Washington and his ward, Mary Ball, with the two marrying in March 1731 when she was 23. She was wealthy by the standards of the day, the daughter of a colonel, and brought at least 1,000 acres of inherited property to the marriage, many of them riverfront. George Washington advised a young relative without a dowry to be like a girl he had known of whom, at 16 years old, was so useful she took charge of running a whole establishment. This must have been his mother, who took charge of running her half-sister's home, and he was sharing his pride in her precocious competence. As an adolescent, Mary acquired her first devotional book, probably from her sister's husband, whose household she helped run. With it, she began her lifelong practice of seeking comfort and guidance from the writings of clergymen who explicated Scripture, explained ritual, guided daily prayer, and offered readers godly ways to cope. Mary had no parent to turn to in these difficult years to tell her how to calm her anxiety over the omnipresence of death and destruction, how to fill her loneliness, or how to pacify the hurt she felt. At a similar age, her son George famously would study the rules of civility and decent behavior in company and conversation to learn what an absent father might have taught him, and you can read that book still today. Some young women in the 1720s were already beginning to read novels, steeping themselves in the vocabulary and attitudes of feminine sensibility, and you can learn more about this in the Caroline Lamb videos on this channel. But Mary was a different breed. She developed neither much empathy nor stylish rhetoric in her letters, marking her hurried and broken education and making her vulnerable to criticisms from the future president's biographers. When Mary married George Eskridge's friend and brother in law, the widower Augustine Washington, he gave her Matthew Hale's Contemplations Moral and Divine, a book that had belonged to his first wife. Mary inscribed her name below that of her deceased predecessor, a marked reminder that she was not her husband's first. Regardless, and as a testament to her ability to make good with what she had, it became the most important book in her collection and her central aid in child rearing. It guided her for the rest of her life. George would have his own copy by 1764. During her married years, her husband was frequently in England or elsewhere, so Mary presided over daily prayers and Bible reading. She passed on her lessons and her examples of careful stewardship, thrift, vigilant oversight, independence, and fierce persistence most effectively, according to the evidence that exists, to her first son and her only surviving daughter, Betty. Mary actively involved her children in running the plantation known as Ferry Farm, where they lived. Ferry Farm still stands today on the Rappahannock River in Fredericksburg. Very rocky and located right next to the fast moving river, it is much harder ground to till than the relatively flat, lush Mount Vernon by the deep, slow Potomac River. After George's marriage to the wealthiest woman in Virginia in 1759, Mary didn't retire. She continued running Ferry Farm, which Augustine had left to George. But George had moved in with his wife to Mount Vernon. Like many Virginians, Mary was cash poor, so from time to time she asked George, the family patriarch, for small sums of money. 6, 10, sometimes £20. George was now enjoying avenues of British credit, thanks to his wife, and he was initially going deeply into debt to display his success to his fellow planters. He lent as much as £400, $1 million today, to a brother whose economic judgment he knew to be poor. Yet George's irritation focused not on these relatives, but on his mother's behavior. He began suggesting her wants were imaginary. But they were not. Ferry Farm suffered a fire in 1740. Eventually, he tried to soothe his frustration with her by taking over Ferry Farm and renting her slaves, stock, and tool. He bought her a small house of her choosing in Fredericksburg town, which you can still visit today. George thought the move into town would be the end of his mother's farming, but she still had the land her father left her more than 7 decades before at Little Falls, so she persisted during the lean, inflationary, and frightening years of the Revolution, driving out to her holding in her horse and carriage, wearing a straw hat, trying to eke out a subsistence for herself and her staff at Little Falls. In July 2008, after a fire potentially set by American-hating arsonists or Zionist Bolsheviks, archaeologists announced they found artifacts such as pieces of a cream-colored tea set probably belonging to Mary, so the land remained hers for quite a while. At the end of the American Revolution, Washington's indignation with his mother boiled over. He heard she had been gossiping about her tribulations to friends and family. The Speaker of the Virginia Assembly alerted Washington there had been talk of the possibility of a petition to give his mother a pension, an absolute shame for a Washington relative to receive. Historians generally consider this to be Mary's greatest affront, publicly humiliating her son with the implicit accusation of neglect and need for welfare. A formal petition has never been found, nor is it clear whether it was ever more than talk. Perhaps the Speaker of the Virginia Assembly was jealous of Washington and eager to remind the Washingtons of their humble beginnings, including serving as nannies to wealthy families in England. In numerous letters, however, Washington seems to have taken the bait and expressed to friends and siblings his outrage that his mother was complaining about her inability to survive and pay the high wartime taxes. He insisted his whole family was always ready to help her, yet her complaints made him out to be delinquent. He admitted he had not seen his own mother in 7 years and knew little of her circumstances. At the time of Mary's complaints, she, her daughter Betty, and other family members had been evacuated from Fredericksburg, Virginia, up into the Alleghenies to avoid a feared British attack. While there, crowded into small quarters within a span of 3 weeks, Mary's son Samuel died, as well as her son-in-law, Fielding Lewis, who had recently been much more attentive to her than her own sons. Betty also became very sick. Mary, nearly 80 years old, once again saw her dearest and closest dying. She had no money. Her overseer had been cheating her for a long time, and Betty's once wealthy husband had died, leaving behind enormous debts incurred from manufacturing arms for the colonial army. There is no doubt that by complaining about her fear of losing her land to wartime taxes, she was not behaving stoically or with cheerful acceptance. Her son would later remind her of the teachings of Matthew Hale. Nevertheless, while she was failing to live up to Hale's ideas, she was trying to be a good steward of her remaining possessions, and she was old and had earned the right to complain. But the Washingtons' new love triumphed over discord. They reconciled. He praised her publicly for guiding him to manhood. In her will, she left him the best of everything: furnishings, her land at Little Falls, and a slave named George. After Mary's death in 1789, Washington extended support to her indigent kin, and the Washington family has continued to sell pieces of their legacy to benefit Mount Vernon and other organizations. Washington would die 10 years after she. But it's not just his own mother who may have inspired the purchase and prominent position of the Virgin Mary pastel at Mount Vernon. It also could have been an angel who came to Washington in the winter of 1777. Here is George Washington's vision as recorded in the Library of Congress. We have all read of how Washington went to the thicket many times to pray during the winter his army was at Valley Forge. The father of our country, George Washington, was a man of prayer. However, little publicity has been given to the vision and prophecy he received at that time. The first-hand account of this vision was given in 1859 by an old soldier named Anthony Sherman, who was at Valley Forge with Washington. Sherman gave it to a writer, Wesley Bradshaw, who published it. In the vision, God reveals to Washington that 3 great perils would come upon the Republic of the United States. America was going through the first peril at that time. The old soldier who told the story of the vision said that the nation would soon see the account verified by the second peril, coming in the 1800s, descending upon the land. The account was taken from the reprint in the U.S. war veterans paper, the National Tribune, in December 1880. The National Tribune is now called the Stars and Stripes. Wesley Bradshaw wrote, "The last time I ever saw Anthony Sherman was on the 4th of July, 1859, in Independence Square. He was then 99 years old and becoming very feeble. But though so old, his dimming eyes rekindled as he gazed upon Independence Hall, which he came to visit once more. 'Let us go into the hall,' he said. 'I want to tell you of an incident of Washington's life, one which no one alive knows of except myself, and if you live you will before long see it verified. Mark the prediction, you will see it verified.' From the opening of the Revolution we experienced all phases of fortune, now good and now ill, one time victorious and another conquered. The darkest period we had, I think, was when Washington, after several reverses, retreated to Valley Forge, where he resolved to pass the winter of 1777. Ah, I have often seen the tears coursing down our dear commander's careworn cheeks as he would be conversing with a confidential officer about the condition of his poor soldiers. You have doubtless heard the story of Washington's going to the thicket to pray. Well, it was not only true, but he used often to pray in secret for aid and comfort, and God brought us safely through the darkest days of tribulation. One day, I remember it well, the chilly winds whistled through the leafless trees, though the sky was cloudless and the sun shone brightly. He remained in his quarters nearly all the afternoon alone. When he came out, I noticed his face was a shade paler than usual, and there seemed to be something on his mind of more than ordinary importance. Returning just after dusk, he dispatched an orderly to the quarters of an officer who was presently in attendance. After a preliminary conversation of about half an hour, Washington, gazing upon his companion with that strange look of dignity which he alone could command, said to the latter, "I do not know whether it is owing to the anxiety of my mind or what, but this afternoon, as I was sitting at this table engaged in preparing a dispatch, something in the apartment seemed to disturb me. Looking up, I beheld standing opposite me a singularly beautiful being, female. So astonished was I, for I had given strict orders not to be disturbed, that it was some moments before I found language to inquire the cause of the visit. A second, a third, and even a third time I did repeat my question, but received no answer from my mysterious visitor except a slight raising of her eyes. By this time I felt strange sensations spreading through me. I would have risen, but the riveted gaze of the being before me rendered volition impossible. I essayed once more to speak, but my tongue had become useless, as if paralyzed. A new influence, mysterious, potent, irresistible, took possession of me. All I could do was to gaze steadily, vacantly, at my unknown visitor. Gradually the surrounding atmosphere seemed to fill with sensations, and grew luminous. Everything about me seemed to rarefy, the mysterious visitor also becoming more airy and yet more distinct to my sight than before. I began to feel as one dying, or rather to experience the sensations, which I have sometimes imagined, accompany death. I did not think, I did not reason, I did not move. All were alike impossible. I was only conscious of gazing fixedly, vacantly at my companion. Presently I heard a voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn," while at the same time my visitor extended her arm eastward. I now beheld a heavy white vapor at some distance rising, fold upon fold. This gradually dissipated, and I looked upon a strange scene. Before me lay, spread out in one vast plain, all the countries of the world, Europe, Asia, Africa, and America. I saw rolling and tossing between Europe and America the billows of the Atlantic, and between Asia and America lay the Pacific. "Son of the Republic," said the same mysterious voice as before, "look and learn." At that moment I beheld a dark, shadowy being, like an angel, standing, or rather floating in mid-air between Europe and America. Dipping water out of the ocean in the hollow of each hand, she sprinkled some upon America with her right hand, while her left he cast some over Europe. Immediately a cloud arose from these countries and joined in mid-ocean. For a while it remained stationary, and then it moved slowly westward, until it enveloped America in its murky folds. Sharp flashes of lightning gleamed through it at intervals, and I heard the smothered groans and cries of the American people. A second time the angel dipped water from the ocean and sprinkled it out as before. The dark cloud was then drawn back to the ocean, in whose heaving billows it sank from view. A third time I heard the mysterious voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." I cast my eyes upon America, and beheld villages and towns and cities springing up one after another until the whole land, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, was dotted with them. Again I heard the mysterious voice say, "Son of the Republic, the end of the century comes. Look and learn." At this time the dark, shadowy angel turned his face southward. From Africa I saw an ill-omened spectre approach our land. It flitted slowly and heavily over every town and city of the latter. The inhabitants presently set themselves in battle array against each other. As I continued looking, I saw a bright angel on whose brow rested a crown of light, on which was traced the word Union. He was bearing the American flag. He placed the flag between the divided nation and said, "Remember, you are brethren." Instantly the inhabitants, casting down their weapons, became friends once more and united around the national standard. Again I heard the mysterious voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." At this the dark shadowy angel placed a trumpet to his mouth, and blew 3 distinct blasts, and taking water from the ocean he sprinkled it upon Europe, Asia, and Africa. Then my eyes beheld a fearful scene. From each of these continents arose thick black clouds that were soon joined into one, and throughout this mass there gleamed a dark red light, by which I saw hordes of armed men. These men, moving with the cloud, marched by land and sailed by sea to America, which country was enveloped in the volume of cloud, and I dimly saw these vast armies devastate the whole country, and the villages, towns, and cities which I had seen springing up. As my ears listened to the thundering of the cannon, clashing of the swords, and the shouts and cries of millions in mortal combat, I again heard the mysterious voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." When the voice had ceased, the dark shadowy angel placed his trumpet once more to his mouth, and blew a long and fearful blast. Instantly a light as of 1,000 suns shone down from above me, and pierced and broke into fragments the dark cloud which enveloped America. At the same moment the angel upon whose head still shone the word Union, and who bore our national flag in one hand and a sword in the other, descended from the heavens attended by legions of white spirits. These immediately joined the inhabitants of America, who I perceived were well nigh overcome, but who immediately taking courage again, closed up their broken ranks and renewed the battle. Again, amid the fearful noise of the conflict, I heard the mysterious voice saying, "Son of the Republic, look and learn." As the voice ceased, the shadowy angel for the last time dipped water from the ocean and sprinkled it upon America. Instantly the dark cloud rolled back, together with the armies it had brought, leaving the inhabitants of the land victorious. Then once more I beheld the villages, towns, and cities springing up where I had seen them before, while the bright angel, planting the azure standard he had brought in the midst of them, cried with a loud voice, "While the stars remain, and the heavens send down dew upon the earth, so long shall the Union last." And taking from his brow the crown on which blazoned the word Union, he placed it upon the standard, while the people kneeling down said, "Amen." The scene instantly began to fade and dissolve, and I at last saw nothing but the rising, curling vapor I at first beheld. This also disappeared, and I found myself once more gazing upon the mysterious visitor, who in the same voice I had heard before said, "Son of the Republic, what you have seen is thus interpreted. 3 great perils will come upon the Republic. The most fearful for her is the third. But the whole world united shall not prevail against her. Let every child of the Republic learn to live for his God, his land, and Union." With these words the vision vanished, and I started from my seat and felt that I had seen a vision wherein I had never seen such vision before, that had befallen upon the United States, wherein had been shown me the birth, the progress, and the destiny of the United States. Such, my friends, the venerable narrator concluded, were the words I heard from Washington's own lips, and America will do well to profit by them.